For centuries, sailors have spoken about strange things that happen at sea. During the First World War, when battles moved beneath the surface, fear took on a new shape. Germany's submarines, known as U-boats, traveled silently through dark, narrow tunnels of water. In fact, it's actually claimed that a lot of them made it into the Gulf of Mexico, which is pretty terrifying. There's probably some still down there. Inside them, dozens of men worked in tight, airless rooms surrounded by steel and pressure. The sea above was cold and endless. One small mistake could mean death for everyone aboard. It was in these conditions that strange stories began to spread amongst the crews. Whispers of bad luck, ghostly shadows, and things seen just beyond the light of their lamps. Were these only the signs of stress and fear, or could something else have been watching them from the depths? Today, we will talk about the UB-65, a German submarine that gained a reputation unlike any other. From the day that it was built, it seemed followed by tragedy. Accidents, deaths, unexplained events made many believe that it was absolutely cursed. Of course, if you've ever been on a submarine, you would know it's cursed anyways, because that is like a hostile environment for any human ever. Like, it's crazy. Anyways, this was a boat that probably should have never gone to sea in the first place. Among Germany's wartime submarines, the UB-65 stands out as one of the most mysterious ever launched. But it was not the only vessel that was really going to face the unknown. In April of 1918, the German submarine UB-85 was found sinking near the coast of Ireland. Its captain, Gunther Kretsch, later said the crew had fought off something that climbed onto the deck, a strange creature with glowing eyes that left the boat badly damaged. 2 years earlier, in 1915, another U-boat, the UB-28, had its own encounter after sinking a British ship. Its commander, George von Forster, said his crew saw something like a huge sea creature rise from the water after the explosion. These stories might sound unbelievable today, but they were told by trained officers, men used to danger and not fantasy. Not to mention, saying things like this, especially as like an officer, gets you discharged usually. But whatever they saw out there, it would leave a lasting mark on those who served beneath the waves, and it showed that strange events at sea were not unique to just one submarine. The story of UB-65 begins in, as we might imagine, a world war. When World War I began, the Allied nations still fought in old-fashioned ways. Soldiers lining up, ships facing each other in open battle. Germany, however, turned to new machines and new ideas. The Germans built what they called wonder weapons. They used poison gas on battlefields, sent zeppelins to bomb cities, and launched submarines, silent hunters that could strike unseen beneath the sea. At that time, Britain ruled the oceans with the world's largest navy. Its ships were powerful but aging, and its admirals believed strength came from size. Germany would see things differently. Instead of giant ships, they built smaller ones that could disappear under the water, which are, as we know, the U-boats. The first U-boats changed everything. They began on a cold, gray morning on September 22nd, 1914. The 7th Cruiser Squadron of the British Royal Navy was patrolling the North Sea, their ships slicing through the calm waves under a cloudy sky. They thought they were fairly safe, but beneath those waters, something unseen would be waiting for them. A German submarine, U-9, watched silently from below. In just 2 hours, 3 British cruisers were gone. They sank without warning, swallowed by the sea, taking more than 1,000 sailors with them. The next spring, in May of 1915, the ocean would strike again. The passenger liner RMS Lusitania was nearing the coast of Ireland when it was hit by a torpedo from a U-20. Also, just pointing this out, this possibly is said to be a psyop, or at least like a false flag type of deal, where it was intentionally sunk just to get the United States into the war, if I remember correctly. Now, I'm no historian in this case, but I could see it. Anyways, within minutes, the great ship rolled and then sank beneath the waves. Many lives were lost, including many American civilians, and that was kind of the point. Because if there's anything that Europeans love doing, it's involving the United States in their problems. What are you guys doing over there? Anyways, in the months that followed, German U-boats became the most feared hunters of the ocean. They prowled silently beneath the surface, striking without warning. More than 1 million tons of ships were destroyed in the just 6 months that followed. The Royal Navy, once the strongest in the world, suddenly seemed powerless. At their peak, the Germans had 142 operational submarines, each one a steel predator, each commander treated like an ace pilot or hero. And in the middle of this deadly race for control, one new submarine was about to enter service. But from the day of its construction strange accidents and dark rumors would turn this vessel into one of the most feared stories of the war. It was August 1917. At the Vulcan shipyards in Hamburg, the cold steel frame of the new German submarine began to take shape, which is, as we know, the cursed UB-65. She was meant to be a weapon of stealth, a hunter in the dark waters of the Atlantic. Small but deadly, she could carry 10 torpedoes and patrol the coastlines where enemy ships passed. To the engineers, she was another step towards Germany's dream of controlling the seas. But then they involved the US again, and it was all over. It's all over, cocksuckers. Anyways, but from the very beginning, something felt wrong. During the laying of her keel, the very base of the boat, a heavy iron girder slipped from its chain and came crashing down. 2 dock workers were trapped beneath it. One died instantly. The other lived for a few hours, calling for help that came too late. Days later, as the submarine's diesel engines were tested, thick gray fumes filled the closed chamber. 3 engineers were overcome by the gas, and when workers opened the hatch, the men were already gone. Then, during her first sea trials, a lookout standing on the deck was washed overboard by a sudden storm. The waves swallowed him before anybody could help. The crew would press on, but the next disaster came from below. A ballast malfunction caused the UB-65 to lose balance and then sink uncontrollably to the seabed. Trapped in the dark, the crew fought for 12 long hours before the submarine finally surfaced. And soon after, another gas leak filled the boat's narrow corridors, killing 2 more sailors where they stood. Look, if you know anything about like sailors or captains or anything on that kind of level, maybe you are one. I don't know who watches this channel. Superstitions run deep. Like, they regard the sea basically as an actual living entity. So all I'm saying is, if this thing is giving you this much trouble, decommission it immediately. But anyways, by now the men were whispering in the shadows about all this crap that was happening. They said the boat was cursed, that something inside its steel walls wanted no man to return alive. But Captain Martin Schelle, young, strict, and proud, would not listen. He believed in discipline, not superstition, which is standard for Germans anyways. Having had a former father-in-law who was German, definitely not a superstitious guy. Anyways, UB-65, he said, would sail and fight like any other submarine. Then came the final tragedy. As the crew loaded the torpedoes for their first patrol, one exploded without warning. The blast echoed through the shipyard. 5 men were injured. Among them was Lieutenant Richter, the second officer. His burns were severe, and after 2 days of pain, he finally died in the hospital. Repairs took weeks. When UB-65 was finally ready again, her steel hull was patched, her engines repaired, but her men whispered that the curse clearly had already taken root, and soon it would follow them to the sea. In October of 1917, after months of delay and disaster, UB-65 finally left Hamburg and then headed for the cold gray waters of the North Sea. Her steel body cut through the waves like a shadow, and inside, the crew sat tense and quiet, because this thing could blow up at any point. Every creak of the metal echoing through her narrow hull was concerning. For Captain Martin Schelle, this patrol was more than a mission. It was a test, a chance to prove that his submarine was not cursed. The men's fears were weaker than steel and duty. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, this thing has had nothing but issues. It's literally like a classic car, right? If you're trying to build one or repair one or do something with it, and it's just having issue after issue after issue, congratulations. It doesn't matter. You could take that thing down to just the frame and replace everything, and it will still be cursed. It's like the ghost in the machine or something. So at first, things would kind of go well. UB-65 moved silently through the waves, hunting enemy ships that never saw her coming. Within weeks, she had sunk 5 enemy vessels, including the HMS Arbutus, a British warship. The crew began to smile again. Laughter returned to the cramped mess room. Someone even joked that maybe the ghosts had been left behind in Hamburg. For the first time, the men felt hope that the dark legend surrounding UB-65 had finally been broken. But predictably, that hope would not last. One cold night, as the submarine drifted just below the surface, a lookout named Peterson stood watch. The sea was calm, the moonlight pale and silver. Then he saw something, a shape, standing on the bow of the submarine. It was a man. As you might guess, that's a bit strange. So Peterson blinked, thinking he must just be seeing things, like it must be a trick of the light. But when the figure turned, the pale face of Lieutenant Richter stared back at him. The same officer who died months ago in the torpedo explosion. Before Peterson could speak again, the figure vanished. Shaken, he rushed to the captain, his voice trembling, but Captain Schelle refused to believe him. He accused Peterson of drinking and ordered him to kind of keep quiet about it. "There are no ghosts on my boat," he said firmly. Yet the story spread anyways, whisper by whisper, from bunk to bunk, mainly because if you say something on one end of the bunk room, it can be heard on the other. The tale would grow. Some claimed to hear footsteps in the torpedo room at night. Others swore they felt cold air brush their necks when no hatch was open. UB-65 had returned to the sea, but whatever haunted her had come along too. During UB-65's second patrol, the crew tried to focus on their work, but the tension inside the submarine would keep growing. The air felt still, and even normal sounds, the hum of the engine, the creak of metal, seemed sharper than before. This thing is literally turning into the Ishimura. One morning, the sub was surfaced, and Lookout stood on its deck scanning the sea. He suddenly felt a light tap on his shoulder, and when he turned around, he saw someone who looked exactly like Lieutenant Richter. The figure said nothing, only looked at him for a moment, and then was gone. Startled, the Lookout lost his balance and then fell down the ladder, breaking his leg. Several crew members who ran to help later said they had seen a shape on the conning tower that vanished soon after. A few days later, two engineers working in the lower section of the sub said they saw a figure that looked like Richter quietly pass through a closed bulkhead. Both men were shaken and then refused to return to that area. The stories would spread quickly. Some men avoided certain rooms entirely. Others stayed awake for most of the night. Discipline began to slip, and the crew grew quiet and uneasy is the best way to put it. During this patrol, UB-65 sank no enemy ships. The crew's nerves were worn thin, and even small noises would make them jump. Then came another tragedy. A torpedo man, already frightened by the talk of ghosts, claimed he saw Richter walk past him. He panicked, climbed up onto the deck, and then jumped overboard before anyone could reach him. The men searched, but he had already sunk into the waves. Captain Shelley tried to calm his crew, but after that day, many believed something beyond their control was aboard UB-65. By the spring of 1918, Captain Shelley had reached his limit. His men were frightened, and whispers of ghostly figures spread through every corner of the boat. At first, Shelley tried to stay silent. He feared that his superiors, if they learned about what was happening, then they would think he had lost control of his crew, or worse, his mind, which, as you might guess, isn't good for you being the captain. But the reports kept coming in. Officers and sailors described the same thing. Lieutenant Richter, their dead second officer, appearing in narrow hallways or standing quietly near the torpedo room. The stories were too similar, too frequent to ignore. Then finally, Shelley determined that he should write up an official report. When his message reached the command, the reaction was mixed. Some officers laughed, thinking it was nothing more than fear and superstition. Germans. Others were angry, believing such claims brought shame to the Navy. Germans. And yet consistent testimonies from several men forced the higher command to look into this deeper. Something was clearly wrong aboard UB-65. To calm the situation, a Lutheran pastor was brought in. He boarded the submarine, walking carefully through the dim corridors as the smell of oil and metal filled the air. With quiet prayers, he blessed each compartment, sprinkling holy water over the control room, engine bay, and bunks. The ceremony was simple, but for the crew watching in silence, it felt heavy with meaning. Soon after, most of the old crew were then transferred to other boats. A new group of sailors took their place, and UB-65 returned to duty. For a while, everything was peaceful. The next two patrols passed without any strange events or accidents. Life aboard the submarine finally seemed normal again. But calm seas do not always mean safety. Beneath the quiet, something unseen still waited, just beyond the light in the cold deep of the sea. It was a calm summer evening off the Cornish coast near Padstow. The waves rolled gently and the sea seemed unusually quiet. Far beneath the calm surface, however, something was about to end. On July 10, 1918, the American submarine L2, commanded by Lieutenant Augustine Grant, was on patrol. His crew had been sent to help a Portuguese ship that had just been torpedoed. As they scanned the water, they spotted something strange in the distance, a German U-boat sitting motionless on the surface. Through his binoculars, Grant could see the submarine was listing to one side as if damaged. And then, something even stranger caught his eye. A lone German officer stood on the deck completely still, staring out towards the horizon. He didn't move, he didn't wave, didn't react, just stood there as the waves lapped around him. Grant, prepared to give the order to fire, was interrupted before his men could actually load the torpedo tubes. UB-65 suddenly shook violently. A deep rumble echoed across the sea, followed by a flash of white spray. In seconds, the submarine exploded and began to sink beneath the waves. The crew of L2 searched the area for hours, scanning for wreckage and calling out for survivors, but there were none. The entire crew of UB-65, including Captain Shelley, had vanished beneath the surface. No one ever discovered what caused the explosion. Some said it was just a gas leak. Others believed it was a malfunction, but one question remained. The German officer standing on the deck just before the blast. Was he a survivor, or could it have just been the ghost of Lieutenant Richter? returning one last time before the cursed boat met its end. It was the summer of 2004 when the sea finally revealed one of its most long-kept secrets. Off the quiet Cornish coast, a British documentary crew was scanning the sea floor, their sonar sending out slow, rhythmic pulses through the dark water. Then, an unusual shape appeared on the screen. Long, narrow, metallic. It looked like a submarine. When the divers went down, they saw it resting on the seabed, tilted slightly to one side. The nameplate was corroded, but still faintly visible. UB-65. After nearly 90 years, the lost U-boat had actually been found. Dr. Innes McCartney, a maritime historian, led the investigation. As his lights moved across the hull, he noticed something rather strange. There were no signs of a torpedo or even mine damage. The metal was mostly intact. No blast marks, no holes from outside attacks. Then came the most haunting discovery of all. The aft hatches were open. It looked as if the crew had tried to escape, but never made it out. Dr. McCartney studied every clue, every twisted valve and open hatch, but the mystery only deepened from here. If there was no enemy strike, then what caused the explosion that sent UB-65 to the bottom? For more than a century, the story of UB-65 has lived between fact and legend. Its wreck lies silent off the Cornish coast, but the questions still rise like bubbles from the deep. What truly happened that day in 1918? Why did the submarine explode without a fight? And was there really something or someone haunting the crew? The sea has always kept its secrets. Even today, thousands of ships rest on the ocean floor, their final moments unknown, and UB-65 is now one of them. And in the future, I'm sure there'll be, probably a spaceship that we have that does the same thing. So when investigators examined the wreck, they found no signs of battle, no torpedo holes, no mine blasts, no gunfire scars. The metal was smooth, almost peaceful, as if the submarine had simply stopped living. Some experts believe UB-65's fate was just another unsolved maritime mystery, a tragic incident swallowed by the vast, unpredictable sea. The ocean, after all, hides a lot more than it reveals. That's why the ocean is scary. But there's another story, one whispered amongst sailors long before the wreck was found. They said, obviously, that UB-65 was haunted. It began after the death of Lieutenant Richter, who was killed in a freak torpedo accident aboard the submarine. After that day, crewmen claimed to see him again, his pale face standing near the torpedo tubes or walking the deck when no one else was there. Even Captain Shelley, the commander himself, made a formal report describing the strange events. It was rare, almost unthinkable for a military officer to speak of ghosts, yet he did. He believed his submarine carried not just men, but a spirit, one that refused to rest. Some say when the UB-65 exploded on the surface, the Americans didn't see a survivor at all. They saw Lieutenant Richter's ghost finally claiming his ship. Others argue there was nothing supernatural at all, just a machine pushed beyond its limits. UB-65 has a long record of mechanical troubles. Its engines stalled, its torpedoes misfired, and several men had already died in earlier onboard accidents. Inside the metal hull, air was hot and thick with fumes. A single spark near the torpedo room could have caused the explosion powerful enough to destroy the vessel instantly. To those who believe this theory, the ghost sightings were not paranormal at all. They were born from fear and exhaustion. The minds of sailors under unbearable pressure, just like the sea around them, haunted not by spirits, but by their own memories. The other one's more just like a psychological theory. Life inside a World War I submarine was unlike anything most humans could endure, especially considering it was brand new technology. The crew lived cramped, shoulder to shoulder, surrounded by oil, sweat, and the constant hum of engines. Air grew foul, sleep was rare, and every sound from outside could be the start of an attack. Under such stress, even the strongest minds could bend. Hallucinations, paranoia, a shared panic, they were all common. It's possible that the men of UB-65 imagined what they feared most, a ghost, a curse, a sense that death was already amongst them. But there's a problem with this theory. Too many witnesses reported seeing the same figure, even at different times. Could all of them have imagined the same man in the same way? That's what makes this mystery so hard to explain. So what could have happened? When we gather all the clues, one possibility seems most likely. UB-65 may have suffered a critical mechanical failure, a spark, a leak, or a pressure buildup. That caused a sudden internal blast. It would explain the open hatches, the lack of battle damage, and its quick sinking. But then there's the final sighting. The American crew of L2 clearly saw a lone man standing on the deck moments before the explosion. If every German sailor perished, who or what was that figure? Could it have been that maybe a body had been just thrown clear by an airburst, standing upright for only a second? Or was it the echo of a story the sea refused to forget? Today, UB-65 rests silent and broken at the ocean floor, half machine, half mystery. To some, it's a warning about the dangers of early submarine warfare. To others, it's a ghost story carried on by the waves and whispers. Whether destroyed by fault, UB-65 remains one of the most haunting tales of the First World War, a reminder that sometimes the line between history and legend is as thin as a ripple on the sea. So as per usual, I like to break in here at the end and kind of discuss some interesting concepts as far as like what could have happened, because, you know, it's always fun to think, I guess, oh, well, it could have been this, or it could have been ghosts, or XYZ. So you really need to look at human psychology when it comes to these things, right? And it's probably more clearly going to be multiple things rather than just say a one thing issue, right? Okay, so let's start with, first off, if humans do not sleep enough, if we are under constant stress, if our parasympathetic nervous system is always activated, if cortisol is dumping into your bloodstream, all of these things create issues. Now, at first, you can deal with poor sleep, right? You can kind of, okay, well, I'm going to have my coffee, I'm just going to kind of keep going, yada, yada. But eventually, if you don't get enough sleep, and this is actually well documented, it doesn't have to be just pure insomnia that causes this. It can just be poor sleep over a long enough period. Then you will start to hallucinate. You will start to see things in the corners of your eyes because your brain is not engaging the lymphatic system as it needs to actually remove waste from the brain. Now, the problem is it's like, okay, well, it's just waste in the brain. What's the issue? You're talking about neurotransmitter buildup, right? You can have certain receptors that if you do not get enough sleep, they cannot actually move those neurotransmitters out of the brain using cerebrospinal fluid as sort of like the wash to get it away. So that's the biggest issue. If you don't sleep well enough for long enough, you will hallucinate. This isn't a question of, oh, well, that's a cop-out. No, you will absolutely start seeing things. And they start as simple hallucinations at first, like a flash of light in your vision, or maybe like right in the corner, you'll see something dark move in a certain way or something like that. But eventually, you will start forming complex hallucinations due to the activations of certain areas in the brain and the visual cortex, known as Brodmann's Area 18 and 19. Both are responsible for complex hallucinations where you see faces, or you straight up start seeing people, right? You start hearing your name being whispered. It's all a predictable issue of the brain. Now, you also have to remember, World War I, complete turning point for all of humanity, right? This was no longer, oh, let's just line up and shoot each other, and then whoever's got the most people wins. Let's wear stupid stuff in the battle so that we can be seen and everything's right. This was like knockdown, drag out horror the entire time. Humanity had not, we weren't even, obviously we were the ones inflicting it upon ourselves, but we weren't ready for this kind of warfare in the slightest. I mean, even today, it's sort of like the drones today, right? We're witnessing the progression of how war is going to change, and by people getting chased down by stuff attached to drones or being dropped from drones, it's horrific, to say the least. But that's how war is going to change in the future. At this point, that's how it changed in the future. So, or in the past, excuse me. So you have essentially untested technology, a new way of fighting. You weren't really safe anywhere. You have these soldiers stressed out because, like, we didn't even have the concept of post-traumatic stress disorder. It was just basically called shell-shocked back in the day, and they would shoot soldiers who were shell-shocked because they thought it was cowardice, which is horrific to say the least. So the point is that the type of environment that these men were placed in, it is absolutely insane. Like, we don't really, I mean, obviously war still exists to this day, but we don't think about it that way because things have been kind of improved. Like, you take these military guys who are in the nuclear subs around the world, I think those go down under the water for like a year at a time, but they are set up in a way that, while extremely uncomfortable, there's predictability and regularity so people's nervous systems can actually relax a little bit. In these U-boats, there was no relaxing. There was constant stress, constant fear, constant everything. So the point is that, is it probable that there was actually a ghost? It's unlikely. I don't think that there's a ghost in this one. I think it's just soldiers who were constantly stressed. They were talking amongst each other, and then you essentially have the next part of what I think may have happened. Given this thing had so many mechanical issues, all it's going to take is for an exhaust leak to happen, right? And back then, nobody would have really understood what an exhaust leak was. Now, an exhaust leak, obviously, you know, you'll be able to open the hatches, clear it out for a little bit, you're good to go. and then the air replenishes itself, and so you can breathe normally again. But you're talking about being trapped under the water with fumes building up in this ship, and it could have been a pinhole leak in the exhaust system. That's all it takes for that to actually start filtering in and replacing air. So while they would have been able to account for humans breathing, which is like, okay, we need to resurface at this point because the air will become too toxic, they probably didn't account for actual fumes building up in the ship. It just seems to me that this thing needed to be rebuilt in a way that may have been helpful. I mean, it could have been as simple as like the torpedo blast punching a hole in a wall that, oh, well, we need to go in and weld it, and then a seam was broken that nobody caught that then could filter into the rest of the ship. It's just the methods by which they built this, it needs to be such a finely tuned thing that likely in that time frame they couldn't do it. So what are we really looking at here? You've got soldiers who are constantly stressed. There's no way for them to actually relax. They're exhausted. Their bodies are essentially breaking down. The neurotransmitters in their brain aren't being washed out like they're supposed to. They're not sleeping very well. They're all freaked out because they're talking to one another about it. So you have basically a group psychosis event taking place. There's fumes very likely leaking into this thing, which means they're all just breathing that in, which is causing their brains to not be able to actually, I guess, rationally make decisions because they're being impacted by the lower oxygen levels. All of this combined to essentially show, yeah, there's an issue. And that's also what I think blew up the ship. To me, after they changed out the crew, the situation was never really rectified because they didn't know fumes were building up in the ship to begin with, right? But the new guys probably didn't have the same fear that the old guys did, right? So when they got moved in there, they didn't have like this latching point. They were like, oh, well, we didn't know about Richter and what happened to him, and we didn't really have any personal connection to him like the first cruise ship did, because they would have known this guy. They would have been pretty close to him, obviously, known who he was, know how he operates, and they would have been affected by the fact that this guy got taken out, right? They're all together in there, and I mean, I know it's like a hierarchy thing with different ranks and whatnot, but they would have been affected by it, like no doubt. The new guys were never affected by it because they never actually saw this guy get taken out. So because of that, there was no group psychosis for them to kind of link onto. Now, were they stressed out, not sleeping very well, probably dealing with their own issues? Absolutely. But there was never one thing that they could point to and be like, there is something haunting the ship. Because as soon as you say something is haunting the ship, that gives your brain something to focus on whenever you start hallucinating or you're exposed to fumes. So what I think happened, just in general, is that maybe they didn't surface as quickly as they should. Maybe instead of 2 days where they should have been like, oh, we need to get some oxygen, they, for some reason, there were ships in the area, they couldn't surface, they couldn't do what they needed to do. Maybe it was a ballast issue, maybe it was a ballast issue, and then as they tried to, like, as they went up, they probably couldn't get the air to filter out fast enough, or they started losing guys, or there was like maybe just a couple of people left because everybody else had pretty much suffocated. Could have just been a buildup of gas fumes at that point. But what happens is, as those fumes built up, which is probably why the hatches were open, they were trying to get the air out. It was too late, a spark would happen. And that's when it exploded. Now, the guy on top of the actual boat, there's no telling when he got out there, right? There's no telling how long he was there for. There's nothing. So this guy, maybe he was the one to surface the boat. Maybe he's like literally the last guy that survived and escaped the fumes before it got too bad down there. And that's also why it didn't necessarily blow up the ship, right? You're talking metal. So the fumes are in the boat. You now have oxygen from up top mixing with it. He managed to get on top of the boat, but he realized, well, I'm pretty much screwed. Everybody I know is dead. That, again, shell shock. That was a very real thing. Basically, overloaded with this guy just stood there. Some sort of spark happens from the gas fumes mixing with the oxygen in the ship itself. It explodes, which causes damage to the U-boat, but then it sinks it, right? It doesn't necessarily cause it to like, oh, wow, it's shrapnel everywhere, right? Not necessarily that, but most definitely it would have caused enough damage to sink it, and then boom, there it goes. He gets blasted off the ship, and then he sinks into the water. Once you reach a certain depth, nobody would find you anyways, and then that was the end of it. To me, with all the mechanical issues that this thing had, with the group psychosis possibly coming into play, accompanied with people not sleeping, constant stress of their systems, the glymphatic system of the brain not actually waste removing anything because they're not sleeping enough, this literally just seems like human psychology mixed with gas fumes building up, oxygen coming into play when they tried to surface it. Pretty much everybody who was in there already being knocked out by the gas, like think of a carbon monoxide leak, and then the one guy who is still awake realizes everybody's already dead, and then he's just standing there. He may not even known the L2 was even there, and then the thing explodes, sending it down, sending him flying, and then that's the end of it. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think this was actually a haunting, or do you think it's just essentially human psychosis from lack of sleep? Let me know down in the comments. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, and channel links in the description. But speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. At the Literal Wendigo tier, we have Gradius, Monkey Man, Scrungle, and Invictus Echo. Thank you guys for your awesome support. At the Eyewitness to the Event tier, we have Beer Malaga, Eddie the Yeti, Dragon Master Knight, and Hope Blighton. Thank you guys as well. At the first-hand accounts, we have the Soggy Anglerfish, and at the second-hand accounts, we have Troy, Fred Rush, Stutz, Bianca, Pouches, and CDD, I think. I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyways, thank you guys for your support as well. And to everyone else, I thank you as well. You guys are awesome. It goes a long way towards helping out, and I do appreciate it. But all right, guys, that's going to do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.